My name is Sophia. I am 31 years old, and I have a twin brother named David. Or rather, I have an older brother whom my family always treated like a prince, while I was nothing more than a pale shadow cast beside him. David was born 8 minutes before me, but in our parents' eyes, he was a gift from heaven. And I, just a redundant afterthought. Since childhood, everything David had was the best: his clothes, his toys, his opportunities. And me. You don't have to be demanding like David. Be humble. You're a girl. You don't need to try so hard. I didn't understand why back then. I only knew one thing. If I could be better than David, maybe they'd finally notice me. I studied harder. My grades were always higher. I played sports better. I won trophies while David never made it past the first round. I excelled at everything, but my parents only praised him. Our David is so talented. David is going to have a bright future. I heard those words all my childhood, and every time I tried to share my achievements, they would nod absently and turn the conversation back to him. I was invisible, a ghost in my own home. When David got sick, the house was in chaos. Mom and Dad stayed up all night at his bedside, bringing him warm soup and medicine, fussing over his every discomfort. When I got sick, "You'll be fine. Don't make a fuss." When David wanted piano lessons, they hired the best teacher. When I wanted to learn the violin, why waste money? Girls don't need to learn so much. His birthdays were grand parties with expensive gifts and a room full of admiration. I got a small cake and a quick happy birthday before all attention shifted back to him. Even at school, teachers who met my parents would always say, "Your son is wonderful. You must be so proud." And they'd beam, nodding enthusiastically, as if I wasn't standing right there, waiting for even a single word of acknowledgement. I began to hate him, not because he did anything wrong, but because he had everything, and I had nothing. So I worked harder. If I couldn't be loved, I would be feared. If they wouldn't acknowledge me as their daughter, I would make the world acknowledge me as something greater. And so, I made a promise to myself. One day, I would leave that house and become someone they could never ignore, even if it meant cutting all ties with them. When we reached high school, our parents made plans for David's future. He wanted to study painting. They paid for him to attend an elite art school. And me? I wanted to study business. You can take care of yourself. Don't rely on your family. Can I take care of myself? Why could David invest in his dreams while I was told to fend for myself? I didn't need their help, but I wanted to be treated fairly. That never happened. So I earned my own scholarship and was accepted into a prestigious university. I worked multiple jobs to pay for rent, food, and books. And David? His parents sent him money every month. Even so, I still tried to keep in touch. I thought, if I succeed, maybe they will finally see me. When I graduated, I sent invitations to my parents, hoping they'd attend. They never replied. I called. No one picked up. A few days later, a relative told me, "Your parents are busy attending David's first painting exhibition." Exhibition? They chose to see his paintings rather than witness the most important moment of my life? I understood then. I had no family, so I blocked their numbers, erased them from my life, and moved to another city. I built my own life. I bought my own house, my own car. I no longer worried about money. I didn't need family, and I never regretted leaving them. Until 10 days ago, when I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct made me pick up. "Sophia, it's Mom." I was silent. I hadn't heard her voice in 10 years. "Your father is dying. You need to come home." For a moment, my heart ached. But then, another voice whispered in my mind, "Why now?" If Dad wasn't sick, would they have ever reached out? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I couldn't just go back as if nothing had happened. I had two choices: refuse and move on, return and face the ghosts of my past. I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the decline button, but in the end, I sighed and said, "Okay, I'll come back." Not as their daughter, not to beg for love, but because after all these years, I wanted an answer. The city hadn't changed, but to me, it was no longer home. When the taxi stopped in front of the grand gate, I looked up at the house where I had grown up. Everything was the same, and yet everything felt different. Maybe because I had changed. I rang the bell. The door opened. My mother stood there, eyes filled with emotions I couldn't decipher. Sophia. Unable to hold back, she rushed to hug me. I stood still. 10 years. Could a hug change anything now? But I didn't push her away either. Inside, I saw David. He still looked handsome, but his once polished demeanor had faded. His hair was unkempt, his clothes no longer pristine. The last time I had seen him, we were 21. Now, I looked at him and saw not a brother, but a stranger. Long time no see, Sophia. His voice was the same, but gone was the arrogance. I sat down across from him, silent. Finally, my mother broke the ice. Do you want to visit your father? I nodded. When I stepped into the dimly lit room, I saw a frail man lying in bed, his skin pale from illness. The last time I saw him, he was smiling with David, while I sat alone in the background. Now he looked at me with tired eyes. Sophia, you came back. I nodded, emotions swirling inside me, and then he spoke the words that made me realize why I was really here. Not for an apology, not for closure, but for David. Story 2. I returned to my childhood home after graduating from college with a business degree. I'm 22-year-old Anna, and to be honest, I had no intention of returning to my parents' house, but here I was. The search for a job didn't take long. Fortunately, I was able to secure a job at Davidson Marketing within a week, offering a respectable salary and potential performance bonuses over Mom's meatloaf that night. I broke the good news. I planned to stay here for 3 months or so, save some cash, and then move out and get my own flat. Suddenly, there was no more clinking of forks against plates. One of the looks that always indicated trouble moving out was exchanged between Mom and Dad. Mom set down her fork. Anna, you are aware that due to my back issues, I am only able to work part-time at the library. Dad cleared his throat. And things aren't fantastic at the plant. Layoff rumors have surfaced. Mom said quietly, we really need your help with the bills. Additionally, there would be no rent to pay here. Doesn't it just make more sense? I felt confined as I gazed at my mostly consumed meatloaf. They had a point. In a way, after all, they were my parents. I could stay longer, I suppose. After then, life settled into a pattern. I went to work, came home, paid the bills, and Mom made sure dinner was always on the table. Until my sister Sarah, her husband Mike, and their children, Emma and Lucas, arrived last weekend. Everything appeared to be fine and manageable. My parents' transformation seemed like a switch being flicked. As Dad swung Lucas onto his shoulders, Mom swooned and scooped up 4-year-old Emma, saying, "Oh, my precious angels." Sarah, you look amazing, my love. How are things going? Tell us everything you've been doing. As my parents gushed over their oldest daughter and her ideal little family, I watched from the doorway. The way they listened to everything she said and demanded information about even the most uninteresting topics. How her garden was doing, what new words Lucas had learned, how her book club was going. That level of interest in my life had never been displayed by them, not even when I made Dean's List or received the business school's leadership award. Anna, be a darling and put on some coffee. While she bounced Lucas on her knee, Mom called over her shoulder without even looking at me. Standing in the kitchen that day, listening to my family's laughing from the living room, I couldn't help but remember back to how things had always been this way. Our family show had always centered around Sarah, who was 7 years older than me, and I was confined to the supporting cast. I recall sitting at the same kitchen table when I was 11, showing Mom my street, a report card. She gave it a fleeting glance and went back to talking to Sarah about applying to colleges. She waved me aside and remarked absently, "That's nice, Anna." Sarah, which colleges are your top picks, honey? Sarah's high school accomplishments were the focus of those years. Her grades, extracurricular activities, and college preparation were the topics of every dinner conversation. I'd sit there silently eating my peas as Mom and Dad hung on Sarah's every word about her AP studies and college visits. Everything changed even more dramatically when Sarah got accepted to Brighton University. I was 11 at the time, and I vividly remember that dinner discussion like it was yesterday. "We're very proud of you, dear." With tears in her eyes, Mom had cried out, "While we're Robert, we'll make it work." Dad gave a serious nod. "We are going to get a student loan. Our Sarah is entitled to the greatest education available." A week after Sarah departed for college, they sat me down for a different type of chat. "Anna," Dad remarked, his voice serious, "for the time being, we must tighten our belts. The loan payments and Sarah's college expenses are significant." That's when things truly shifted. I held on to my old flip phone until it practically broke when I needed new clothing, while my peers received new phones every year. We headed to second-hand stores instead of the mall. Christmas gifts became practical items like socks and school supplies, but they never forgot to send Sarah money. "Your sister needs to focus on her education," Mom would say as she scribbled another check. "We must prevent her from experiencing financial hardship." I learnt my lesson early. I participated in every club and academic competition I could find when I was 15. I stayed up late studying not just for good grades, but for perfect ones. I prepared essays for scholarship competitions until my hands cramped, because I knew that there would be no student loans for me. It was worthwhile. I got a full scholarship to State University, and I still remember the look of relief on my parents' faces when I told them they wouldn't have to spend a dime on my education. In the meantime, Sarah graduated, found employment in Brighton, and promptly wed her college sweetheart, Mike. Within 2 years, she had Emma and Lucas followed. My parents were ecstatic shortly after. They're flawless. Daughter had created a perfect family now. The process became the same with each monthly visit. Before I could properly greet them, Sarah and Mike would arrive with the kids. It would be Sarah organizing her weekend. "Anna, while we go shopping, you'll keep an eye on Emma and Lucas, right?" Not really asking Micah, she would say. "They barely get any alone time these days." I initially attempted to propose that our parents babysit them in their place. "Oh, sweetheart," Mom would say, patting her back. "You know, it's hard for me to keep up with small children. Additionally, your dad needs to sleep on the weekends." As Lucas attempted to color on the walls of my bedroom, I found myself watching Frozen for the 100th time with Emma on another Saturday. Our parents were wandering around the garden, stopping occasionally to check on me, while Sarah and Mike were out to lunch with friends. Like they were being helpful to me. I made an effort to comfort myself by reminding myself that it was just one weekend every month. One weekend of being the trustworthy, free babysitter, while everyone else went about their lives. This monthly routine of bills and childcare lasted for a year. I had nearly grown used to it almost. Then came the phone call that would completely upend my already convoluted life. I was doing dishes after dinner when I heard Mom's phone ring from the kitchen. I heard her astonished. "Sarah." "Oh, sweetheart, don't weep." What happened to her sobs? "Tell me." "Mike's business unexpectedly went bankrupt," Sarah explained. "They had no funds and were unable to pay their rent. Could we maybe stay with you for a while?" I could clearly hear Sarah's voice over the phone because it was so loud. "Of course you can," Mom yelled without hesitation at all. "We'll create space." My stomach dropped. I cleared my throat and took a step forward. If they're moving in, maybe this would be a good time for me to get my own apartment. You'd think I'd suggested burning down the home. Mom gave me the look of someone who had lost their mind. "Anna, don't be silly. There's plenty of room for everyone. We are family, though." "Firmly," Dad said. "When things get tough, we support one another." They came the next weekend with 3 cars full of things. On Saturday morning, I moved my belongings into the tiniest bedroom in the house, just large enough to fit a dresser and a twin bed. That had been our storage room. Since the kids need room to play, my previous room, which was twice as big, became the nursery. 3-year-old Lucas and 5-year-old Emma regarded the entire house as their own playground. They raced up and down the corridors, yelling and laughing, as Sarah watched TV at high volume, or had lengthy, noisy phone talks with her pals about how tough this shift was for her. "Emma, keep it down, Lucas." I'd shout out when they rushed into my room for the 10th time, tossing my work papers everywhere. "They're just playing Anna." Without barely raising her eyes from her phone, Sarah would remark this in a contemptuous manner. "Don't be such a grouch. I just wanted to unwind in my room after work. maybe watch something on my laptop or read a book. Instead, I got to listen to Baby Shark playing on loop through the thin walls, accented by the steady beat of small feet running back and forth, and Sarah's loud laughing at whatever show she was watching below. Mike spent his day purportedly job hunting, but largely, I noticed him sitting at the kitchen table, looking through his phone with a troubled frown. The current job market is difficult. I'm sure something will come up soon, but he would say every time someone asked. I lay in my tiny bed each night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the chaos that had become my home, and wondered how I'd let myself get trapped in this situation. However, I stayed silent every time I considered bringing up the subject of moving out again, since I was aware of my parents' reaction. After Sarah's family moved in, I was completely taken aback by the first utility bill. I stood in the kitchen, marveling at the figures that were almost double what I typically paid. Just the water bill has increased dramatically, not to mention heating and power. Looking at my bank account, I realized that my ambitions of saving for my own apartment were swiftly fading. I made the decision to bring it up during dinner that night. Let's talk about the utility bills. I began around the dish with my piece. They doubled since last month. I am no longer able to pay all of the costs on my own. It's using up nearly all of my pay. Sarah's dish clattered as her fork struck it. Are you really whining about money at this moment? When everything has been lost for Mike and me, I have no complaints. I just think we need to figure out a fair method too. How self-centered you are is unbelievable. Sarah's voice rose. You only care about money while we're going through the most difficult period of our lives. Sarah is correct. Anna. Mom jumped in. Family helps family. We do that. Dad gave a serious nod. Right now, Mike and your sister need our help. Now is not the time to be a penny counter. I swallowed the words I truly wanted to say and looked down at my plate. All right, never mind. A week later, Mike finally obtained a job with an insurance business. Although it didn't pay as much as his prior job, at least it was something, and I hoped that things would start to improve. I was wrong. Being by alone with the kids all day is really difficult. Almost immediately, Sarah began to complain. Mike doesn't return until 6 o'clock after leaving at 8. I'm never able to relax. Then it began. First, a modest request. While I run to the store, Anna, could you watch the kids for an hour? If you could watch them while I wash, Anna, would you? These little favors had grown into something far larger before I realized it. Sarah would be ready to go out when I got home from work. Oh, excellent. You're home, she would say, reaching for her handbag. Mike and I are meeting friends for supper. Though they'll need dinner in an hour, Emma and Lucas have already eaten their snack. By 10, we'll be back. Weekends became my personal nightmare. Sarah and Mike would casually share their intentions on Friday evening. Lunch with friends and a shopping excursion. A date to see a movie, leaving me for hours with the children. Mom and Dad easily started visiting relatives more regularly, usually disappearing immediately after Sarah and Mike departed. Over and over again, I would be attempting to stop Emma from scribbling on the walls, as Lucas had another fit because I had sliced his sandwich incorrectly. On Saturdays, I would make mac and cheese, clean up toys, and watch children's films over and over again. By Sunday night, I'd be fatigued, my house would be a wreck, and I'd still need to make dinner for everyone. One evening, after a particularly exhausting weekend of childcare, I finally worked up the courage to say something at dinner. I must speak with every one of you, I remarked, setting down my fork. I'm exhausted. I'm not happy with the childcare situation right now. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean that it's not functioning? Do you mean that you don't want to be around your own nephews? Mom patted Sarah's hand as she reached over. Honey, don't worry. This is actually fantastic preparation for Anna. She'll need to know how to handle children when she becomes a mother herself someday. Consider it training. And that's it. They resumed their customary talk over supper. Sarah discussing her day, Mom and Dad depending on her every word, Mike nodding along. I pushed food around my plate while sitting there, invisible once again. After that talk, nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. Mike and Sarah appeared to view my grievance as a challenge, coming up with even more excuses to go out. When I arrived home from work, they would be waiting by the door. I have the car keys. "We're meeting pals at that new restaurant downtown," they'd say. "The children have already had their snack and are halfway out the door. Thanks, Anna." Weekends started to fear me. I'd wake up on Saturday mornings with a knot in my gut, knowing I'd spend the next 2 days watching Paw Patrol and mediating sibling conflicts while Sarah and Mike enjoyed their best lives. Then, on a Wednesday, everything changed. Despite my fatigue, I was at my desk at work attempting to concentrate on the marketing report, when my cubicle was visited by my friend Rachel. "Hey, want to do something fun this weekend?" Perched on the edge of my desk, she inquired. "A bunch of us are going to the Pine Ridge Ski Resort. Just a quick weekend getaway. Leave Saturday morning. Return on Sunday evening. At this time, the slopes should be ideal. In months, for the first time." I became a little excited. As I packed my duffel bag in my small bedroom on Friday night, I was genuinely excited about the weekend ahead. For once. Sarah showed up in my doorway as I was folding my warmest jumper. "What are you doing?" She looked at my partially packed backpack and inquired. "Packing for a ski trip." With my warm socks rolled up, I answered. "Traveling to Pine Ridge with a few coworkers." Sarah's face clouded. "You must cancel." I looked up, astonished by her tone. "What? Why would I do that?" "Because," she crossed her arms and said. "This weekend, Mike and I are attending Linda's 60th birthday celebration in Millbrook. Mom and Dad are coming too. You and Emma and Lucas must remain here." At the sheer insolence of it all, I couldn't help but laugh out. "I take it you're kidding?" I said, continuing to fold my ski trousers. "You can't possibly expect me to cancel my plans since you didn't bother to notify me about yours." Sarah's cheeks grew crimson. "Anna, this isn't funny. You're acting really irrationally. No, it's not reasonable to expect me to suddenly drop everything to be your personal babysitter once more." Sarah's jaw dropped. After spluttering for a moment, she turned on her heel and bounded out of my room. "Mom, Dad, Mike," I could hear her shouting down the hallway. "Anna's actions will astound you." I kept packing, my hands shaking slightly with wrath. The cavalry's arrival was signaled by the thundering of footsteps. As Sarah, Mike, and my parents crammed themselves into my little room, it felt even more constricted. Mom's look was already one of disappointment. I was very familiar. "Why are you going to go skiing?" She made a demand, hands on her hips. It's exactly how it sounds. As I zippered up my duffel bag, I answered, "I'm heading to Pine Ridge Resort with my buddies for the weekend." "You can't, though," Sarah cried out. "We're at Linda's gathering." "No, you were present at Linda's gathering," I corrected her. I halted my activity and looked at each of them. Why have I only now heard about this party? What prevented me from being involved in any of the planning? Mom paused, appearing uneasy for the first time. With a tone full of condescension, Sarah jumped right in. After talking it over, we all agreed that this would be the most practical solution. We go to the party, you watch the kids. It's the most sensible configuration. You all talked about it. I chose what I would do this weekend after progressively repeating without me. How practical. Well, you can't exactly bring small children to a sophisticated party. Sarah specifically said, "No kids," as she sniffed at Linda. My duffel bag was shoulder-borne. "It sounds like an issue with you." "Sarah, they're your children. Work it out." "What's that intended to mean?" Mike eventually spoke out, frowning. "It means precisely what it sounds like. I have plans. I'm going skiing. It is your obligation, not mine, to raise your children. Either don't attend to the party or get a babysitter if you can't bring them." "A babysitter," Sarah shrieked. "With what money?" Again, not my problem. I turned to face them all, suddenly feeling stronger than I had in months, maybe years. Let me make this crystal clear. I am going skiing tomorrow. I've finished being your convenient, free babysitter. I'm done having my weekends hijacked, my plans ignored, and my life treated like it doesn't matter. Sarah, if you require child care, as a parent, you are accountable for that. Don't expect me to take your slack all the time. The ensuing hush was deafening. As though I had suddenly begun speaking in tongues, they all looked at me. Like a fish out of water, Sarah's mouth moved back and forth. Mom appeared to have been smacked. Dad appeared to be attempting to blend in with the doorframe. Mike, too. Mike simply stood there looking as perplexed as he has ever been since his business failed. It was a brief period of stunned quiet. Sarah covered her face with her hands as her face collapsed, and she started to sob theatrically. Mike muttered something under his breath that sounded very much like an ungrateful bitch. You dare? Mom's voice lifted, following everything that we have done for you. You're acting utterly carelessly, selfish. Dad shook his head in response. Utterly self-centered. There I stood. As I watched my family devolve into a Greek chorus of accusations, I kept my duffel bag over my shoulder. The words came to me in waves. Selfish, ungrateful, careless, immature. Each one was designed to pierce deeply, to return me to my proper position. Then Mom gave what she obviously believed to be the last blow. Don't even bother returning to this house if you leave tomorrow. To the astonishment of everyone, I started laughing. Not a tense giggle, but a full, sincere chuckle. They all looked at me like I was crazy. You know what's funny? Wiping tears from my eyes, I said. I've been dreaming of moving out of this place for months. I simply lacked the bravery to do it. But here you are, providing me the ideal justification. So thank you. Mom, leave now, Sarah yelled, her phony sobs forgotten in her wrath. Simply leave. Thank you. In an attempt to make a point, I put my phone on speaker and called Rachel. Hello, Rach. I apologize for the late call, but is it still possible to crash at your place? Perhaps for a few days, not just after skiing. Naturally. The room was filled with Rachel's upbeat voice. I've got an extra room. Do you want to visit right now? That would be ideal. I'll be there in 20 minutes. For the next 15 minutes, I gathered as many clothes, important documents, personal belongings, and other items as I could fit in my car. As though they couldn't quite believe I was actually doing it, they watched me stumble up and down the steps from different entrances. They were all gathered in the living room when I finished loading the final box. Oh, I said steadily, one more thing. Since I won't be living here anymore, none of the bills will be paid by me either. You'll have to find a way to make ends meet. Mom's face turned white. However, but the food, the utilities, not my problem anymore, I said, repeating what I had stated before. I turned and walked out the front door, ignoring Mom's suddenly panicked calls behind me. Anxiety and relief filled the trip to Rachel's house. I started seeing texts and calls on my phone. Mom's guilt-tripping novels and Sarah's angry texts. Dad's major disappointments. I disregarded them all. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Rachel and I made the planned drive to Pine Ridge Resort the following morning. I did just what I wanted to do for a whole weekend. We went skiing. We chuckled. By the fire, we drank hot chocolate, and I never had to care about the troubles or kids of anybody else. When we returned on Sunday evening, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. My family will no longer be supported by my earnings. In fact, I could afford a good house. By Wednesday, I had located a modest yet light one-bedroom flat in a pleasant part of town, only a 15-minute drive from my place of employment. I had to relearn how to breathe during my first week in my new flat. I awoke to a beautiful stillness each morning. No loud television, no yelling kids, and no mother's sighs of guilt. The coffee was still hot enough for me to make and consume. I could read or watch anything I wanted on Netflix in the evenings. But the messages continued. I read the texts even though I didn't answer the calls. They have a recurring pattern. How could you leave your family in such a manner, Mom? Sarah, we need you. You're really self-centered. Where is Aunt Anna? The children ask. Dad, your mother is very upset. You must put this right. The text swung between guilt trips and furious accusations and begs. I read them all, but answered to none. My silence appeared to drive them further mad. They were not accustomed to being powerless over me. I was sitting on my new couch after a week of this, when my phone flashed my mother's number once more. This time I chose to respond Anna. Mom's voice was sharp at last. It's unbelievable that your self-centered actions utterly interrupted our entire weekend at Linda's celebration. You wouldn't stop and babysit the kids, so Sarah and Mike couldn't come. I spoke quietly yet firmly. Simply stop. I'm done with this, Mama. In my own house, I'm sick of being treated like a servant. I'm tired of having to give up my life, my money, and my time for the convenience of others. I'm tired of serving as the family's free babysitter and ATM while being treated like I'm unimportant. When Mom spoke again, there was a lengthy silence on the other end. She was now speaking in that wheedling tone I was so familiar with. We're family, honey. even though things haven't always been ideal. You are necessary to us. This month's bills. Without your assistance, we're having trouble. No, Mother. I'm finished. Perhaps we can get back together eventually. However, it will be on equal footing. No more guilt trips, no more manipulation. No more providing free babysitting or treating me like a walking wallet. I need room to live my own life till then. I quickly blocked her phone after hanging up. After that, I banned them all on my phone. Sarah, Dad, Mom, and even Mike. It felt both scary and freeing to block them on social media, like breaking anchor lines I didn't even know were securing me. I might be ready to reunite with my family at some point. Perhaps with enough time and space, we can create a new, better, respectful, and boundary-based relationship. Or perhaps we won't. In any case, I'm tired of putting their incessant demands ahead of my own pleasure and well-being. Story 3. I was standing in my recently remodeled flat, tracing the newly painted wall with my hand. From the dining room's crystal chandelier to the hardwood floors, everything was flawless. I had finally built the house of my dreams at the age of 27. I'm grateful for my accomplishments at Morgan & Stanley Investment, and if I'm telling the truth, my father's inheritance. I'm Emma, and I don't exactly have a happy narrative. You see, I've decided to invite my mother and my half-sister, Sarah, to my housewarming party today, which is a dubious choice. My stomach turns at the mere thought. I was setting out appetizers in my shiny new kitchen on silver platters. Childhood memories came rushing back. The ongoing suffering caused by my half-sister Sarah, who seemed to enjoy ruining everything I held dear. The result of my mother's relationship with Tom, who never bothered to marry her but was able to send monthly child support checks. I was 7 years old when she was born. I recall the day my father gave me my first art kit as a present for my 12th birthday. After just 2 days, I discovered Sarah, who was 5 at the time, painting the walls with my pricey brushes and splattering paint all over the carpet in my bedroom. Mom dismissed my tears when I ran to her. Emma, she's still a baby. Sarah did have better knowledge than she does. Like when she cut my favorite sweater with scissors. Dad got me that one for Christmas. The night before my science project was due, she unintentionally spilled juice all over it. Mom had the same reaction to every incident. Emma, stop being so dramatic. Sarah's actions weren't even the worst part. It was her mother's total incapacity to correct her. Sarah seemed to live without rules or consequences, but I did. Mom didn't have time to be a parent. She was too busy living the good life that came with receiving alimony from both my father and Tom. I therefore made the choice that altered my life at the age of 14. I moved in with my dad. Mom's expression when I told her she wasn't sad about losing me is still in my memory. She was furious about losing Dad's alimony payments. We didn't speak for years after that. Living with Dad was like finally being able to breathe. He encouraged my interest in finance, helped me with my homework, and showed me what it meant to be valued. When he passed away during my college years, it felt like losing my anchor. He left me his entire fortune, which gave me the freedom to pursue my dreams, but also made Sarah's jealousy even worse. The doorbell rang, and I felt my heart rate spike. The first guests were arriving, my aunt and uncle. Thankfully, not my mother and sister yet. As I opened the door, genuine warmth spread through me at their excited exclamations over the apartment. Since the place was filling up with friends and relatives, all of them admiring the modern kitchen with its marble countertops and the elegant living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone was having a good time drinking wine and sharing stories. Everything was perfect. The click of those stilettos got louder. And there they were, my mother, in her usual overdressed glory, and Sarah wearing a dress that looked like it was painted on. The party had been in full swing for over an hour, with soft jazz playing in the background, and my guests engaged in pleasant conversation over wine and or nerves. Just the kind of elegant, calm gathering I'd wanted. Sarah paused in the doorway, her nose wrinkling as she surveyed the scene. "Oh my God," she announced loudly, her voice cutting through the gentle murmur of conversation. "Is this a party or a nursing home?" Social hour. There was silence in the room. Mai and Caroline stopped mid-sentence, wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. No one laughed at Sarah's joke. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, but forced myself to stay composed. Sarah strutted into the apartment she had visited many times. Now it was completely renovated, but still holding those precious memories of Dad. I watched as she ran her hand along the new granite countertop in the kitchen, inspected the designer light fixtures, and peered into every room. The jealousy was written all over her face. I'd seen that expression too many times not to recognize it. Her eyes had that same gleam they'd had when Dad bought me my first car, or when he paid for my college tuition. Then she spun around, a smile spreading across her face that made my blood run cold. "This place is amazing, Emma. I've decided I'm moving in next week." I actually laughed, assuming she was joking, but Sarah Grin didn't waver. "I'm serious," she said. "This home is simply too huge for just you. And honestly, you owe me. You received everything from your dad." "And what did I get?" "Nothing, Sarah," I said slowly, attempting to keep my voice steady. "You're not moving in here ever. I call this place home." Her face twisted in anger. "You selfish bitch!" she yelled, forcing several of my visitors to jump. "You think you're so much superior than everyone else because Daddy left you all his money? You live in this lovely place, while Mom and I barely get by." I expected my mother to step in to calm Sarah down, or at least seem embarrassed by her outburst. Instead, she walked forward, arms crossed, and locked me with an accusatory gaze. "Emma, I can't believe how greedy you gotten," she murmured, shaking her head. "Would it kill you to help your sister? To provide her with lodging? Following everything that our family has endured? Our household," my voice trembled as I repeated. "The family where you did nothing but let Sarah to torment me for years. That household. You dare?" My mom let out a gasp. "Sarah, hurry up, we're heading out. It's obvious that your sister values her opulent residence over her own family." Sarah rushed outside, almost bringing down a base. My mother trailed after, stopping at the door long enough to give me the same dismaying expression she had given me when I decided to move in with my father. There was an absolute silence in the flat when the door slammed behind them. Then everyone appeared to relax at once, as if they were all exhaling. Others began talking softly about what had just transpired, as Caroline and I approached and squeezed my hand. After the housewarming catastrophe, everything resumed as usual. I plunged myself into my work in an attempt to block out Mom's accusations and Sarah's rage. A month or so after the party, I was summoned to my boss's office. "Emma," he continued, slipping a document over his desk, "we need you to handle the Meridian contract personally. It's significant. To straighten everything out, we spent 2 weeks in Phoenix." I nodded, already getting ready for the journey in my head. The work required business travel, and to be honest, spending a few weeks away from the city and perhaps running into Mom or Sarah seemed ideal. I sent Mom a brief note that night. "On my way to Phoenix for a 2-week work trip. Just so you know, I wasn't expecting much of a response, but the tiny person was nevertheless shocked by the total stillness. She had been ignoring me ever since the party, presumably waiting for me to say I was sorry, as if I had something to say. It was a tiring 2 weeks in Phoenix. Contract discussions, late-night document checks, and endless meetings. All I could think about by the time I got on my trip home was settling into my cozy sofa with a bottle of wine and finally unwinding in my quiet apartment. The subtle scent of cigarettes and stale booze in the corridor outside my door was the first clue that anything was amiss. As I entered my key, my stomach knotted, but nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered within. My house seemed to have been destroyed by a tornado. Cigarette butts and empty bottles were all over the floor. There were what seemed to be burn scars and wine stains all over the pricey white leather sofa. God knows what food stains, drink splashes, and what appears to be deliberate graffiti were all over my lovely, recently painted walls. My legs are trembling. I walked across the rubble. The enormous television that I recently purchased has broken pieces of its screen all over the kitchen floor. My marble counters were covered with mildew that appeared to be from an old takeaway, and the sink was heaped high with dirty dishes. But when I pulled open the door to my bedroom, the worst was still to come. Sarah was obviously intoxicated when I saw her stretched over my bed, still in her shoes. My immaculate white bed linens were marred by what seemed to be pizza sauce and makeup. Something snapped inside me when I saw her there, sleeping soundly in the middle of all this devastation. I took hold of her shoulders and began to shake her. "Get up." "How in hell have you damaged my house?" She spoke incoherently and slapped at me as if I were a bothersome fly. All right. After pacing to the restroom, I poured a glass with cold water and came back to hurl it straight at her face. Sarah spitting and swearing, she jolted awake. What on earth is the matter with you? With mascara streaming down her cheeks, she let out a scream. Tell me how you got in here and stop yelling. What the hell have you done to my apartment? I interrupted Sarah's tirade of profanities. Sarah rolled her eyes and used my Egyptian cotton pillowcase to wipe her face. As if it were the most normal thing in the world, Mom handed me the spare key, said that while you were away, I may stay here. However, this location was rather dull. All elegant and flawless and lifeless as a rock. I thus invited several pals over. The spare key, naturally. The recollection was like a kick to the stomach. Years ago, just after my father passed away and I acquired the apartment, I gave my mother that key as a contingency measure, she added. And now, without even consulting me or any of my pals, she had given it to Sarah. I pointed to the devastation all around us. My house has been totally destroyed by you. Take a look at this location. My TV, the walls, and the furnishings. Sarah grabbed her phone from the nightstand and shrugged. We hosted a few parties, went a bit crazy. What's so important? You're loaded. You may just purchase new items. Leave now. I was trembling as I spoke. Leave my apartment immediately. No. As she scrolled through her phone, she collapsed back on my bed. This place appeals to me. I'm staying because Mom said I could. Take care of it. I took out my phone and quickly dialed my mother's number. On the third ring, she answered. Come on over here, I spoke in a cold tone. Visit my apartment to see what your beloved Sarah has done. After 28 minutes. I was counting, yes. My mother entered my front door. I observed her expression as she processed the situation. The walls are discolored, the furniture is broken, and there are bottles and trash all over the place. Her face hardly moved. This is what your daughter done to my house, I replied, sweeping my arm across the destruction. Dad left me at home, the house I recently renovated for a fortune. And you handed the key to her without consulting me? Mom adjusted a crooked picture frame and picked up an empty bottle of wine, placing it on a side table. Her voice was unbelievably calm as she continued. I don't understand why you're so upset. Thus, they hosted several parties. You have enough of money to make everything right. You can afford it, after all. I was dumbfounded when I looked at her. Something that I should have comprehended years ago suddenly made sense to me at that moment. No matter what Sarah did or who she harmed, she would always pick Sarah. Mom would always defend her and explain what she was doing. You can always count on me to give in. Give more. Give up. Take Sarah and leave. My teeth were tight as I said, You both go out of my apartment immediately. Mom brushed away several cigarette butts and sat down on my wrecked sofa. In fact, I believe that this may benefit you both. Sarah is in need of lodging. Additionally, you have a lot of space. Living together could help you two mend your relationship. Mend our relationship. What I was hearing was unbelievable. She damaged my house after breaking in. I didn't break in. Now lying splayed over my recliner, Sarah snapped. I got the key from Mom. Quit being so theatrical. She was not intended to give you a key. I could sense that I was losing control. I call this place home. Mine. I was left to do it by Dad, not to you, not to your mother. I'm going to call the cops if you don't leave now. Sarah giggled and flung back her head. Mom joined in, both of them staring at me as if I were a toddler threatening nothing. Sarah teasingly said, Go ahead. Give them a call. What will you say to them? That your sister entered your flat using a key, that we hosted a few parties. Bingo. I took out my phone and phoned 911 with shaking fingers. When Sarah saw that I was really doing it, her smile wavered a little. What is your emergency, 911? I need cops in apartment 7B, 1542 Riverside Avenue. My voice was more steady than I felt as I spoke. My house has been broken into, and the intruder won't go. The knock on the door came less than 5 minutes later. There were 2 policemen in the corridor. A younger woman with her hair tucked back in a tight bun, and a tall man with graying hair. Officer Martinez is who I am. The woman introduced herself as Officer Chen, someone called to report a break-in. I opened the door for them, observing their eyes enlarge as they surveyed my apartment's condition. I call this place home. I mentioned that I had been out of town for 2 weeks on business. Without my consent, My mother handed my sister my backup key. She has also been residing here, damaging my stuff and hosting parties. She is now refusing to go. Bitch, you stuck up. Sarah threw herself at me, but Officer Chen stopped her. Calm down, please, ma'am. Sarah replied with a barrage of expletives that would have made a sailor blush when she said it to her. I can't be arrested. My sister's selfishness is to blame for this. Officer Martinez started reading her rights, interrupting the remainder of her outburst. As they shackled Sarah, she yelled and struggled. She called me every possible term she could think of and threatened to sue everyone. You dare! Mom eventually broke her composed exterior and sprang to her feet. Getting your own sister taken into custody. You disgusting, ungrateful monster. I should have anticipated that you would become just like your dad. Heartless and frigid. I was left alone in my demolished flat when she raced out after the cops, yelling that she was phoning our family attorney. For a long time, I stood there encircled by the ruins of my lovely house. Replacing only the TV would cost hundreds of dollars. It would be necessary to repaint the walls entirely, the furnishings. I counted the damage as I went about taking notes on my phone. I could bring in an appraiser, keep a record of everything, bring Sarah before the judge. My proof was more than sufficient. Additionally, no court would support her given her actions in front of the police. However, I noticed something I didn't want to when I glanced at my phone's expanding list. I didn't want to fight with Sarah in court for months or perhaps years. I didn't want to hear her voice during depositions or see her face across a courtroom. I made another call and erased the list. Rather. 24/7 emergency locksmith, a rough voice said. Hello, I urgently need all of my locks replaced. There is an urgent situation. My mom's name appeared on my phone a week after the police encounter. Something forced me to answer the phone when I was about to decline. We need to talk, Emma, she remarked in a softer tone than I had heard in weeks. Is it possible for us to meet tomorrow at 12 hours at Riverside Cafe? I believe it's time for us to talk about everything that transpired. I had a flash of hope. Perhaps she had finally come to terms with her and Sarah's mistakes. Perhaps she was prepared to say she was sorry. All right, I concurred. I'll be present. I got at the cafe on time the next day. Mom was there already, seated with a spread of food in front of her at a corner table. The priciest dishes available, a bottle of fine wine, truffle pasta, and lobster salad. I only requested water. Mom murmured, Emma, dear, wiping her lips with a handkerchief we created to talk about the serious psychological harm you've caused to your sister. My water almost swallowed me. Please pardon me. Sarah's arrest. Are you aware of what it has done to her? She was had to stay at the police station for hours. Every one of her pals is aware of it. She is in complete despair. Mom regretfully shook her head. Apologizing and compensating her are the only ways to put things right. The mental suffering should be compensated for with $25,000. I sat there for a time, startled into silence. Then the words just poured out. Are you serious? Sarah damaged hundreds of dollars worth of property, had crazy parties, and broke into my house. And you believe I ought to compensate her? Mom dismissed it with a wave of her hand. Oh, don't be too materialistic, Emma. She so threw a few parties and caused several mishaps. You're wealthy. Everything is easily replaceable. It's difficult to repair the emotional harm you've caused her. With a smirk that made my fury boil, she turned around after walking toward the door. Oh, and take care of the bill and be kind. I am aware of how much you like flaunting your money. After watching her go, I turned to face the table laden with pricey foods. She had given the command. I saw that Mom had even purchased a few sweets to go when the waiter arrived with a check. The cost of the meal was more than $200. She had hardly made contact. After kicking off my shoes and entering my partially restored flat, I took a seat at my desk. I kept thinking about the cafe encounter. Mom's impromptu request for $25,000. Her total disregard for the harm Sarah had inflicted. Like she had been done for years, she had snuck me the bill without thinking twice. I opened my laptop and retrieved my bank data. In black and white, it said that since her father's death, $2,000 had been deposited into her account each month. In addition to all of the utility costs, I paid her home's property taxes, the never-ending flood of unexpected costs. She was always in need of assistance. After Dad's funeral, it had begun. Mom had come to my apartment sobbing about how difficult her financial situation was and how she was struggling to make ends meet. She had said, I'm too old to find a job now. Additionally, I felt bad about the years we hadn't discussed going out to live with Dad while Sarah was still in school. I had thus consented to assist. That assistance has become a never-ending drain. Brand new appliances, when hers inexplicably malfunctioned. She needed to keep up appearances, so she wore designer clothes. Somehow, home repairs usually end up costing thousands of dollars. She had never once sought employment over this entire period. Never made an effort to become independent. Why would she? I was hers. Her own ATM. I clicked on a fresh email and began typing. Mom. I've made a significant choice in light of our chat today. I shall no longer be paying any of your bills or sending you new monthly payments as of right now. My financial assistance was always intended to be short-term rather than long-term. I made the decision to assist you, not my responsibility. I've spent years attempting to prove that I was a decent daughter in order to make up for my decision to live with my father. By providing for your way of life, that's over now. You and Sarah need to start taking care of yourself. Never get in touch with me again for money. Before I could second-guess myself, Emma, I pushed submit. I then canceled all of her utility provider's automatic payments by going into my bill pay account. Less than 15 minutes after I sent the email, the phone rang. I let the voicemail go. Time and time again it rang. At last I responded. You dare? Mom's voice sounded high-pitched. Your mommy is me. You have a responsibility to look after me. This is how you pay me back for everything I've done for you? By abruptly interrupting me. You haven't helped me in any way, I said, feeling surprisingly at ease. You have repeatedly taken, and then you had to be a mother to me, when my house was being destroyed by Sarah. At the time, she was ruining my life. She was always your choice. Always asked for more from me, but she was free to do as she pleased. You were raised by me. You were nourished by me. I am aware that my father reared me since I was 14. It was him who looked after me. You just subsisted on his alimony. You found someone else to help you when that ceased. You and Sarah need to start supporting themselves now. You're a little ungrateful. The phone rang again, but I didn't answer, so I hung up right away. I blocked her number instead. I felt completely free for the first time in years. As soon as I banned their phone numbers, the texts began to pour in. Initially via WhatsApp, followed by Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. They were all more irate and desperate than the previous. Your actions are ruining this family, Mom wrote. I hope your loneliness and wealth bring you joy. Sarah sent a message. The only person who would desert their mother and sister would be ruthless. When you need us, you'll be sorry you did this. One by one, I blocked them on all platforms. However, they continued to reach me in new ways. They even began contacting my pals with detailed tales of how I had left them in poverty while I was living in luxury. With my security, I was not taking any chances. I explained the matter to Frank, the concierge for our building. Under no circumstances are my sister and mother permitted to leave. Even if they claim it's an emergency, I told him. When I got home from work the very following evening, Frank stopped me. Your mother and sister were here almost an hour ago, Miss Thompson. They attempted to persuade me that they had your consent to ascend. Your sister became pretty outspoken when I declined. Before they departed, I had to threaten to contact security. Over the following several weeks, I immediately upped his Christmas bonus and thanked him. I immediately started remodeling my place once more. Fresh paint, new furniture, and a new TV. I removed any evidence of Sarah's devastation. All the reminders of that horror. Now, though, something seemed different. Once upon a time, this was my haven. The family gossip clouded my relationship with my father. According to what I heard, Mom and Sarah were having financial difficulties, moving from one family to another and requesting loans they would never be able to pay back. Conveniently omitting the bit about breaking into my house or demanding payment for getting detained, they were telling everyone who would listen how I had rudely interrupted them. Several times in the neighborhood, I ran across Mom. Since she lived so nearby, it was unavoidable. She alternated between irate demands and heartbreaking entreaties as she attempted to corner me. Could we just chat, Emma? We are related. With my pulse racing but my determination unwavering, I would pass by silently, my heels clicking on the sidewalk. I spent last week perusing real estate listings for contemporary condominiums in various areas, safe buildings with stringent access regulations, and locations where I could start again, without having to worry about bumping into them, or if they would try to break in again. I had lived at Dad's apartment for a long time. It was filled with so many memories. At the kitchen table, homework sessions are held. Sunday a.m., pancakes, lengthy discussions concerning my future. Perhaps, though, it was time to let it go. A penthouse ad in a new construction across town caught my attention, so I bookmarked it. The building included a breathtaking view of the city, private elevator access, and round-the-clock security. More significantly, it symbolized what I had unknowingly been looking for my whole life: genuine autonomy, a fresh start. I'm going to give the realtor a call tomorrow. Time for a new beginning, one that's really mine. Story 4. Almost as long as I've been Maverick's wife, I'm Zinnia and I work as a doctor. Despite all of the highs and lows that come with a long marriage, our 29 years together seem to have flown by in a flash. Our large, always warm home was bustling with activity, particularly when Ronan and our 2 sons were little. Even though they were completely different from one another, they both contributed to our satisfaction in distinct ways. Both Maverick and I were physicians, and we put a lot of effort into making our family's life secure and pleasant. In order to generate some more revenue, we eventually even purchased a few apartments and rented them out. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, as if we had a nice course. Everything appeared to be going well until Maverick returned home one day, and I could tell by the way he looked that something was up. I hadn't seen him that somber and pallid in a long time. Zinnia, we must speak. He put his medical bag down beside the entrance and spoke in a deep, solemn voice. Last week, I had several testing completed. The findings have returned. It's cancer. Zinnia. Our lives took a radical turn after that. Following that, the months were a haze of medical appointments, therapies, and long wait times. Despite Maverick's best efforts to think, the disease showed no compassion. I could never have imagined what it would be like to see the strongest person I know gradually deteriorate, regardless of how long I had been a doctor. Maverick clasped my hand as we sat in the silence of our living room one evening. His voice was solid, yet his grip was feeble. Zinnia, I need you to make sure everything is taken care of with the boys in case things don't work out as planned. You will be financially secure since the will has been completed. Not too long afterward, Maverick died. Family, friends, and co-workers traveled from far and wide to attend the solemn but dignified funeral. However, the stillness struck me more forcefully than I had anticipated after everyone had departed, and I was alone myself in the home. In Maverick's absence, the home felt so empty. He had left his belongings exactly as he had left them. But my heart hurt even more when I saw them. They barged in a few days after the funeral as I was in the kitchen attempting to decide what to do with all the food that was left over. Ronan followed him with a worried, angry expression on his face, as if he wished he were somewhere else. We must discuss Dad's, Mom. As usual, he got right to the point when they responded, Well? I put down the plastic wrap I was holding and groaned. Yes, I am aware of it. Silently, I said, I inherited everything from your father. I jumped as he slapped his hand down on the counter, wanting to make sure I was taken care of there. What about Ronan and me, though? We're his sons. The fact that we received nothing is unfair. There, Ronan, who was always the more composed one, attempted to defuse the situation. Let's take our time with this. Mom is still in mourning. We don't have to battle to solve this. However, it was not having it. It's easy for you to say. He fired back. I worry about the future, but you don't. I felt the weight of what they had spoken as I leaned against the counter. I constructed this life with your father, and he trusted me to take care of everything. I hear you there, though. I understand that you don't think this is fair. Raising his voice, Thayer crossed his arms. What is the strategy, then? We simply bide our time till you deem it appropriate to give us our portion. There, I sensed my patience ebbing. Observe your tone, I yelled. Your mama is still me. With his hands raised as if to mediate the dispute, Ronan moved between us. Please, both of you, he begged. Nobody is benefiting from this. Perhaps we can find some middle ground here, Mom. I massaged my temples, experiencing the strain of the circumstance. Construction. After a time, I responded, All right. What we can do is this. I bought those downtown flats with your father. I looked at the person who was still furious. Each of you takes an apartment. You may now reside there, or rent them out as you choose. I'll also give each of you $450,000 from the funds to help you begin anything you need. I firmly said, the money that stays with me for now, while Thayer bit on his lip, obviously considering the figures and the other DoD items in the house. Everything will come to you after I'm gone. It's going to be that way because that's what your father desired. Maverick had trusted me to respect his last desires, and I knew I would do the same. It was going to be difficult to cope with the lads and their worries. Despite the loss of our strongest anchor, we would need to navigate these unfamiliar seas as a family. I gave them a fixed glance. He appeared to want to continue the argument, but Ronan nudged him a little. Man, let's consider this. Mom isn't abandoning us, and it's a decent beginning. At last, they nod. He still appeared dissatisfied, though. All right, his lips were pressed together. But Mother, I want this in writing. No more surprises. Naturally, I concurred. We'll thoroughly document everything. As they walked out of the kitchen, Ronan was whispering to me there. Will you give her a break? There, she's giving it her all. He said something to himself. I missed it, though. As I stood there doing the dishes, I must admit that I wasn't very interested in hearing what he had to say. My thoughts drifted. I pondered what Maverick would make of my approach if he could see us now. Time would tell, but I hoped I was doing appropriately. Additionally, time may be problematic while I was studying. Not all the time was it in your favor. On one of those few days when everything seemed to be going well, it was a bright day. They hadn't been dating long when Thayer brought his new girlfriend Juniper over to meet me for the first time, but it was clear that he was smitten with her. It was obvious from the way he fussed over her, which was very out of character for Thayer. When they stepped in, he was normally so cool and composed. There was a certain confidence in Juniper, as if she owned the area already. She walked straight into my living room, scarcely saying hello, and was dressed to impress in pricey clothing. She looked around the room, absorbing everything. You have a nice location here. Without waiting for me to offer her a seat, she sat down and flipped her hair back. Sitting beside her, smiling like a naive lover, was Thayer. I made an effort to grin. I'm trying to be courteous, thank you. Juniper, is there anything I can get you? Coffee? Tea? Coffee sounds delicious. Then she turned to Thayer. Make sure it's black, darling. Steer clear of sugar. They agree and rush out to the kitchen, leaving me sitting in my living room alone myself with her. All of a sudden, I felt like a visitor. It was awkward for us to be silent until Juniper eventually said something. That indicates to me that you're doing fairly well for yourself. As she spoke, her gaze strayed across the room's decor. You know, I'm used to a particular standard. That's what my parents ensured. Unsure of what to say, I nodded. I'm glad to hear that. I got a response. When he returned, Thayer gave her the coffee. She wrinkled her nose and took a sip. It's okay. Anyway, she added, seemingly discarding the coffee. We've been talking about our future planning ahead, you know. That's shrewd, I said, looking at it to get a sense of the direction of the conversation, but all he could do was smile uneasily. Juniper put down her cup and went on. In relation to planning, we have been considering the wedding. I want something special, you know. You've probably heard from Thayer. Although it's a little pricey, I saw this lovely venue for the rehearsal dinner. It is roughly $60,000. I almost choked on my $60,000 coffee, only for the rehearsal dinner. Thayer jumped right in. It's very important to Bella, Mom. We want to get things off to a good start. I set down my cup as my frustration increased. That's a lot of money for a dinner, you know. Juniper, we must exercise reasonableness. The look on Juniper's face changed. Her expression hardened, and she answered calmly. Reasonable. You have the means, Thayer says. Why we should compromise on something so significant is beyond me. Though there was a glimmer of discomfort in his eyes, I could see Thayer nodding in agreement with her. He was aware that their demands were excessive. I make an effort to remain composed. I'm all in favor of festivities. However, $60,000 is excessive. I simply cannot justify spending that much money, and it is completely excessive. With a loud scrape of her chair against the floor, Juniper jerked to her feet. Zinnia, I'm not accustomed to lowering my standards. There, I was quite explicit about the type of life I wanted. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Thayer jumped in once more. Maybe we can all agree on something. A middle ground, Mom. But I was at my breaking point. When it comes to shelling out $60,000 for a meal there is no compromise. That's the end of it. Juniper snatched up her handbag and glared at me. All right. Perhaps we should reevaluate a few things if that's the way things will be. I sat there, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. And they left soon after. That girl had the audacity to enter my house, drink my coffee, and then give me financial advice. It was like being slapped across the face. It was an unexpected wake-up call. I learned that Thayer and Juniper had returned to the house a few days later while I was out at the grocery store, once I arrived home. In the living room, I discovered Ronan clumsily attempting to amuse Thayer and Juniper. You wanted to run out the door again because the atmosphere was so tense, but I had to brace myself because this was my home. And inside, Juniper, dressed as usual, handed me a piece of paper as soon as I set down my grocery bags. Zinnia. After much consideration, this is what we have decided on for the wedding presents. I hope you can handle this more easily. I took a look at the list. Surprisingly, it made sense. A few pieces of furniture, some lovely china, and kitchen appliances. I grinned in relief and remarked, "This seems pretty reasonable." These are excellent choices, in my opinion. For a brief moment, Thayer's expression was hopeful as he looked at Juniper. I was about to talk about where we could buy the things, though. Juniper's face shifted suddenly. "This is wrong! Oh no!" she gasped, snatching the list back from my hands. She dug into her purse and took out another piece of paper. "This is the real list." I took the new list from her and my jaw dropped. This wasn't anything like the first list. This one included requests for diamond jewelry, a luxury car, an apartment, and even a special vacation. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, stunned. Juniper remained unflinching. "No joke. Sonia, these are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding." I stared at her, then at Thayer, waiting for him to say something. Anything that would show he didn't agree with this madness. But he just stood there silent, looking back and forth between us, clearly torn, but saying nothing. I couldn't hold back anymore there. "Why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable." Before Thayer could respond, Juniper cut in, her voice rising. "This doesn't concern you, Sonia. You just need to pay up and keep quiet." That was when Ronan stood up, his face hard with anger. "That's enough. Juniper, you're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now." The room was filled with heavy silence as Thayer and Juniper gathered their things. Juniper muttered angrily under her breath as they left, slamming the door behind them. I sat down, feeling the weight of the entire situation pressed down on me. Ronan sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure this out, Mom. But you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right." He was right, of course, but I couldn't shake the worry about Thayer. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was heavy with unsaid concerns and fears for the future. I realized then that this was far from over. Things were only going to get tougher from here. In the weeks that followed, my phone rang constantly. Thayer called almost every day, and each call was more demanding than the last. His tone became more desperate, almost frantic. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look for next to Bella's family," he would argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot form in my stomach. There. It's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations. You can't keep up with that. Not without going into serious debt. He scoffed, his frustration boiling over. "What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like I need more for my inheritance now." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm there. "I've already offered to cover half of the wedding costs up to $230,000 and give you a $10,000 gift. That's more than generous, but everything has to be agreed upon with me. No more surprises." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before I heard him let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me?" I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Because it's not just about the money. It's about making smart decisions and not letting yourself be driven by someone else's unrealistic demands. But there wasn't listening anymore. The calls kept coming, the same arguments over and over again. I worried that the relationship I had with my son was slipping away, and all over money. Each call left me feeling more weary and more confused about what the future contained for our family. I replied, my patience wearing thin. It's not about the money there. It's about not feeding into this fantasy that's going to destroy you. He then shouted so loud that I had to move the phone away from my ear. I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you. And just like that, he hung up. Months passed in quiet. I tried to keep myself occupied with a daily routine, doing my best not to linger on it for a time. It appeared like there may be peace, but it didn't last. One afternoon, my phone rang and it was my sister-in-law, Marigold, Zinnia. I thought you should know Marigold's voice was hesitant, as if she didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. There is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his flat to fund it, and he expects you to find your own way there. He indicated you weren't interested in assisting, so I hung up, a tornado of grief and rage roiling within me. How could he have acted so carelessly? Ronan entered the room before I had a chance to comprehend what Marigold had told me. He had a somber countenance. I need to tell you something, Mom. I took a little audio recorder from him. I captured their chat when they were here last. I believed you ought to be aware of their words. When I hit play, the kitchen was filled with Thayer and Juniper's voices. Juniper was the first to speak, her voice piercing. Your mother is only a shady old lady with a large fortune. After extracting as much as possible from her, we must cut her off. The voice that followed was pleasant and chilly. Bella, whatever it takes. I refuse to allow her to rule us. I'll throw her out in her underpants if necessary. I halted the recording because it was too painful to listen to my own kid speak so cruelly about me. My hands were shaking. As I attempted to understand the extent of his treachery, the room appeared to whirl. I didn't make the choice to travel to Hawaii for the wedding lightly, but I knew I had to face this challenge head on. When we landed and reached the location, Ronan was standing next to me, both of us apprehensive but determined. The sheer grandeur astounded me. There were flowers everywhere. The air was filled with music, and lights strung up like stars. It was like entering a fairy tale that was too good to be true. As we entered the event, there I observed Juniper interacting with visitors. They appeared to be the ideal pair. It was all laughing and smiles, but seeing my kids so engrossed in this fantasy world broke my heart. Before I could approach, Sauce with Juniper, her high heels clicked violently on the stone sidewalk as she marched toward me, her grin gone. You're not supposed to be here. She stopped inches from me and snarled. She raised her voice loud enough to be heard. You are not welcome on my day. I was taken aback and startled into quiet. However, her parents went to her father before I could reply, and a tall, stern-looking guy spoke first. Juniper. Speaking to guests in that manner is unacceptable, especially Thayer's mother. I could see Juniper in his tone, which was harsh. Embarrassment made his cheeks flushing. Her mother turned to me with an apologetic grin, appearing equally horrified. Please join us, Zinnia. Let's locate a seat for you. Obviously an afterthought, they led us to a table near the perimeter of the gathering. I could sense the tension in the air, and there was no appropriate setting. Shortly later, the ceremony began with statements that, considering the underlying pressure, seemed empty. Then I suddenly got a microphone in my hand. Even though my legs were unsteady, I knew what I had to say. To wish my son and his new bride a bright future, I came here today. Despite my internal shivering, I started speaking steadily. However, I also think that integrity and honesty are important, and those have been absent, as have the events that have preceded this day. I looked at Juniper, whose face was becoming hot red instead of pink. Anger blazed in her eyes. I was repeatedly requested for sums of money that no sane person could justify. I was also intimidated when I failed to comply with their requests. I'm afraid of losing contact with my own family and my future grandchildren. Sensing my concern, Ronan, I continued even if my voice broke. Put a comforting hand on my shoulder and take a step closer. After giving him a nod, I took out the audio tape he had created. Juniper's icy, cunning voice reverberated around the room as I hit play, talking about how they would con me out of more money. After then, a voice was heard. He accepted the plan, and even declared that he was willing to abandon me in order to protect his fiancée. Shock and disgust filled the air as the throng began to grumble. I switched the recorder off. There was a heavy hush in the room after that. I handed $50,000 and an apartment to my son. My voice became more solid as I spoke. However, it was never sufficient. I'm stating unequivocally now that I will not be intimidated or treated like an ATM going forward. I'm finished. I'm choosing to cut myself apart from their lives, even though I wish them and Juniper well. The response came instantly. Juniper let out a piercing, violent scream. "My wedding has been wrecked by you." It was bittersweet to return home after everything that had transpired. I even astonished myself with the choice I made in the silence. After working as a doctor for years and assisting others in their healing, I resigned. I knew it was time to concentrate on my own recovery. I had to reconstruct my life after it had been shattered by previous storms, individually. Bless him, Ronan had recently graduated from art college and was bursting with enthusiasm, ideas, and aspirations. Using the $50,000 I contributed to him, he set up shop for tattoos. However, it wasn't your typical store. People took notice of his work because it was a beautiful blend of skin and art. He soon began to attract notice by competing in tattoo competitions. His business quickly became a neighborhood hotspot, and his name was soon on everyone's lips. Ronan quickly grew, adding new sites and creating a network of tattoo parlors that attracted a lot of tattoo fans. Late at night, I would watch him sketch. His commitment is evident and motivating. In sharp contrast to the anarchy that had taken over there, he was creating something amazing out of his existence. "Ollie, you're doing fantastic." My heart swells with pride as I tell him. During this quiet period, Thayer made a comeback. He arrived at my door one afternoon. His shoulders drooped and his eyes appeared weary. He wasn't the astute, driven individual I had known before he received an invitation. He took a seat and talked. "I need to chat, Mom." He spoke in a tired tone that was very different from the demanding one I had become accustomed to. I let out a sigh and motioned for him to go on. "What's that?" "Bella is here," he said, furiously massaging his face. "She is making me obsessive. She keeps asking for more, and nothing I do is sufficient. I was even hired for a second job. For her, though, it's still insufficient." Even though I could sense the despair in his voice, the past was too easily erased by his words. "I warned you, Thayer." My voice was solid as I said. "I warned you that cohabitating with someone like her would only end badly. I am certain that you did." With sadness in his voice, he confessed. But I had an idea. What did I think? After years of being frustrated that the money would just show up because you wanted it to gaze at your brother, I interjected, unable to control my tone. "He began with the same sum of money as you, and without trampling on anyone's toes, he created something." My statements made Thayer furious. "Mom, not everyone is like Ronan. The inheritance belongs to me. Should keep in mind. I'll figure it out after you're gone." The final straw was that, "Step outside!" My voice was icy and decisive as I spoke. "And don't return. You made your own decision." He remained there for a time, his jaw clenched as if he were about to argue. He slammed the door behind him as he turned and ran out. There was a heavy stillness after that, but I felt no remorse. Ronan heard the final portion of our conversation and came downstairs. "Mom, are you all right?" he inquired. His expression was one of concern. I put my arms around him and nod. "Thanks to you, I am now. Just concentrate on the good we can do and the life we can create together." I felt calm in that instant when he gave me a hug in return. We still had each other in spite of the hardships and heartaches there, and that was plenty to keep going. Calmed down once Thayer left the house. This tranquil time was the first time I had felt in years. Ronan introduced us to a unique individual. Callista was her name, and she was everything. Juniper lacked humility, kindness, and real concern. Their romance developed over the course of the weeks and months, and they soon declared their engagement. Their wedding was the exact opposite of what they had planned. Extravagant event. In our backyard, it was a small yet meaningful ceremony. The garden's flowers. The day was made lovely by homemade decorations and a small gathering of close friends and relatives. I drew Ronan aside at the reception. "You've made a great choice." My voice was full with emotion as I spoke. He looked at me knowingly as he clasped my hand. The finest taught me. After then, life happened fast. Together with some of their savings, they utilized the proceeds from the sale of the flat I had given Ronan to purchase a comfortable small home a short distance away. We were enjoying tea in their beautiful living room, one bright day, when Callista broke some news that almost caused me to spill my drink. Zinnia, we have twins on the way. Her eyes glowed with anticipation as she made the announcement. Twins, I repeated, ecstatically happy. That's fantastic news, Ronan grinned proudly. Mom, we wanted to let you know first. We are quite joyful. Twins, I repeated, allowing the words to fully register. I felt a fresh thrill at the prospect of being a grandma. I couldn't wait to start this new chapter in my life. There wasn't much news from Thayer. He had divorced Juniper when I last heard from him. He had to start again in another city because she had taken almost everything in the separation. The knowledge that he was out there someplace, hurting as a result of his own decisions, still ached despite everything he had done. Ronan sat next to me one evening while I was looking through old photo albums. A photo of Thayer and me from years ago caught his eye. Is he ever in contact with you? Gently, he inquired. I gave a head shake. No. After everything, even if it pains me, I have to accept that he has chosen his own path. Ronan wrapped me in his arm. I still consider him a brother, Mom. Perhaps he'll change his mind. Perhaps, I answered, not sure if I believed it, but with those twins on the way, there was plenty to concentrate about for the time being. Ronan laughed. Yes, you will soon be the busiest grandmother in the community. The sound of our laughter filled the room with warmth. It felt like everything was finally falling into place right now with Ronan, despite the history, the errors, and the heartaches. We were and are getting on with life. With fresh aspirations and ambitions imminent,